In the quiet town of Basin City, nestled among tree-lined streets and suburban serenity, a tragedy unfolded that would forever haunt the memories of those who lived there. Twin brothers, once seen as inseparable and harmless, were accused of a crime so brutal, it defied belief. Their mother, a woman who had raised them with unwavering discipline, was found murdered in her own home. But what could drive two young men, who shared everything since birth, to commit such a horrific act? The answer lies within the dark secrets of their home, where love turned to hatred and a house of strife became a house of horrors. Basin City was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's names. The Masons, like many families in the area, were well known in the community. Lisa Mason, a single mother, had moved to Basin City shortly after her divorce, hoping to start fresh with her twin sons, Nathan and Nolan. The boys were just 8 years old when they arrived, and from the very beginning, they were the talk of the town. Identical in appearance, Nathan and Nolan were often the center of attention. With their bright blue eyes, sandy blonde hair, and matching outfits, the twins were impossible to ignore. Lisa, a woman in her late 30s, was determined to provide the best life possible for her sons. A former schoolteacher, she took a job at the local elementary school, where she quickly became known for her no-nonsense attitude and strict teaching methods. At home, Lisa's approach to parenting mirrored her teaching style. She was a firm believer in structure, discipline, and hard work. The twins were expected to excel in their studies, participate in extracurricular activities, and adhere to a strict schedule that left little room for leisure. As the boys grew older, the rules only tightened. Lisa had high expectations, and she made it clear that failure was not an option. But what the neighbors saw on the outside was only part of the story. Behind the doors of the Mason household, the atmosphere was often tense. The twins, who were once inseparable, began to show signs of strain. Nathan, the older of the two by just a few minutes, was the more reserved and introspective of the pair. He took his mother's expectations seriously, often internalizing the pressure to succeed. Nolan, on the other hand, was more rebellious. He chafed under his mother's strict rules and was more likely to push back when he felt cornered. As the years passed, the differences between the twins became more pronounced. In their early teens, they were still close, but the bond they once shared was beginning to fray. Nathan's quiet demeanor hid a growing resentment toward his mother, while Nolan's defiance became more visible. He began to skip classes, hang out with a rougher crowd, and experiment with smoking and drinking, activities that were strictly forbidden in the Mason household. Lisa's response to Nolan's behavior was to tighten the reins even further. She imposed stricter curfews, monitored his activities closely, and grounded him for weeks on end when he stepped out of line. Nathan, though less rebellious, felt the weight of these rules as well. He, too, began to feel suffocated by his mother's constant oversight and her relentless pursuit of perfection. By the time the twins reached high school, their relationship with their mother had deteriorated significantly. Arguments became a regular occurrence in the Mason household, often escalating into shouting matches that could be heard by neighbors. Despite the tension, Lisa remained steadfast in her belief that she was doing what was best for her sons. She saw herself as their protector, the one person who could guide them toward a successful future. But the twins saw things differently. To them, their mother's strictness felt more like control, an iron grip that was squeezing the life out of them. The tension came to a head one fateful evening when the twins were 16. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. Lisa had prepared dinner, as usual, and the three of them sat down to eat. But as they ate, an argument erupted, one that would set the stage for the tragedy to come. Nolan had come home late from school, and Lisa was furious. She accused him of lying about his whereabouts, of disrespecting her rules, of throwing away his future. Nathan, who had been silent for most of the meal, suddenly spoke up. He defended his brother, telling his mother that she was too hard on them, that her rules were suffocating them. The argument escalated quickly. Harsh words were exchanged, and for the first time, Lisa felt as though she was losing control of her sons. The twins stormed out of the house, leaving their mother alone at the dinner table, her mind racing with anger and frustration. Over the next few weeks, The atmosphere in the Mason household grew colder. The twins barely spoke to their mother, and when they did, it was often through clenched teeth. Lisa, for her part, tried to regain control by imposing even stricter rules. She limited their access to the internet, forbade them from seeing friends outside of school, and threatened to send them to a military boarding school if they didn't straighten up. The twins, feeling cornered, began to talk more seriously about their situation. Nathan, who had always been the more thoughtful of the two, started to see his mother's actions not just as strict parenting, but as a form of oppression. Nolan, already rebellious, took it a step further. He began to fantasize about what life would be like without their mother, without the constant pressure, the endless rules, the feeling of being trapped. It was during one of these conversations that the idea first came up. It started as a joke, a dark fantasy shared between two brothers who felt they had no other way out. But as the days passed, the idea began to take root in their minds. What if they didn't have to put up with their mother anymore? What if they could be free? The plan, as it formed, was simple. They would wait until the time was right, until they knew they could get away with it. They would make it look like a burglary gone wrong, a random act of violence that would leave them free to live their lives without the shadow of their mother's expectations looming over them. But plans like these rarely go off without a hitch. As the twins began to put their plan into motion, they underestimated just how much their mother knew about them. Lisa, for all her strictness, was not oblivious to the changes in her sons. She noticed the way they whispered to each other when they thought she wasn't listening, the way they avoided her gaze, the way they seemed to be pulling away from her entirely. And so, on the night they had chosen to carry out their plan, Lisa was not entirely unprepared. She had a feeling that something was wrong, a mother's intuition that told her she needed to be on guard. As the twins crept into her room that night, armed with a knife they had taken from the kitchen, Lisa was waiting. What happened next was a blur of violence and chaos. The twins, caught off guard by their mother's resistance, panicked. In the struggle that followed, Nathan was bitten on the arm by Lisa, a wound that would later become a crucial piece of evidence. But in the end, the twins overpowered their mother, stabbing her repeatedly in a fit of rage and desperation. When it was over, the house was silent. Lisa lay dead on the floor, her blood staining the carpet. The twins, in a state of shock, stood over her body, their minds reeling from what they had just done. The plan had gone horribly wrong, and now they were left to deal with the aftermath. The next morning, the town of Basin City was awakened by the news of Lisa Mason's murder. The police arrived at the scene, finding the twins in a state of shock. They claimed that they had come home to find their mother dead, that they had no idea who could have done such a thing. But from the very beginning, their story didn't add up. For one, there were no signs of forced entry into the house. The doors were locked, the windows were intact. There was no indication that anyone had broken in. The police began to suspect that the crime was not a random act of violence, but something far more personal. As the investigation progressed, more evidence began to surface. The knife used in the murder was found in the twins' room, hastily cleaned but still bearing traces of blood. Surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store showed the twins purchasing items that were later found at the crime scene, contradicting their alibi. And then there was the bite mark on Nathan's arm, a chilling piece of evidence that tied him directly to the crime. The police also uncovered a series of text messages between the twins, messages that painted a disturbing picture of their relationship with their mother. In these messages, the twins expressed their growing hatred for Lisa, their desire to be free from her control, and their frustration with their lives. One message, in particular, stood out. Sent by Nolan just days before the murder, it read, "We need to do something. We can't live like this anymore." With this evidence in hand, the police arrested the twins on suspicion of murder. The town was shocked. How could these two young men, who had always seemed so close to their mother, commit such a heinous act? The case quickly became a media sensation, with news outlets across the country picking up the story. The trial of Nathan and Nolan Mason was one of the most sensational cases in Basin City's history. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers, all eager to see how the case would unfold. The twins, now 18 years old, sat side by side at the defense table, their expressions somber and unreadable. The prosecution painted a damning picture of the twins, describing them as cold, calculating killers who had plotted their mother's murder in order to escape her control. They presented the evidence, the knife, the bite mark, the surveillance footage, the text messages, as proof of the twins' guilt. The prosecution argued that the twins had grown to resent their mother so deeply that they saw murder as their only way out. The defense, on the other hand, tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the bite mark could have been inflicted during a struggle with an intruder, and that the text messages were taken out of context. They also suggested that the twins had been coerced into making incriminating statements by the police, who were eager to close the case quickly. But despite the defense's efforts, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Nathan and Nolan Mason were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the town, but the scars of the tragedy would linger for years to come. The Mason house, once a symbol of suburban stability, became a grim reminder of the darkness that had consumed the family. Neighbors who had once admired Lisa for her dedication to her sons now whispered about the tragedy that had befallen her. Some blamed her strict parenting style, arguing that it had pushed the twins to the breaking point. Others pointed to the twins themselves, wondering how two young men could commit such a brutal act. In the years that followed, the twins remained incarcerated, separated from each other for the first time in their lives. Nathan, who had always been the more introspective of the two, struggled with the weight of his guilt. He spent his days reading, writing, and reflecting on the choices that had led him to this point. Nolan, on the other hand, remained defiant, refusing to acknowledge his role in the crime. He continued to blame his mother for everything that had gone wrong in their lives, refusing to see himself as a perpetrator. The Mason case became a cautionary tale, a story that was told and retold in Basin City and beyond. It was a reminder that the darkness we fear most is often the one that lies closest to home. For the people of town, the tragedy of the Mason family was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that even the most seemingly perfect families can harbor deep and dangerous secrets. The story of Nathan and Nolan Mason raises important questions about the nature of family, the impact of upbringing, and the lengths to which people will go to escape their circumstances. It forces us to consider the fine line between discipline and control, and how easily it can be crossed. Lisa Mason believed that she was doing what was best for her sons, but in the end, her strictness may have contributed to the very outcome she sought to prevent. For the twins, the tragedy lies not just in the crime they committed, but in the lives they could have led had things been different. They were intelligent, capable young men with their whole lives ahead of them. But instead of using their potential for good, they allowed their anger and resentment to consume them, leading them down a path of destruction. In the end, the story of the Mason twins is a chilling reminder that the bonds of family, while strong, can also be fragile. When those bonds are tested by conflict, resentment, and unmet expectations, they can break in ways that have devastating consequences. As we reflect on this story, we're left to wonder what could have been done differently. Could Lisa have been less strict, more understanding of her son's needs? Could the twins have found a way to communicate their feelings without resorting to violence? Could someone, anyone, have intervened before it was too late? These are questions that may never have definitive answers, but they are questions worth asking. For in asking them, we begin to understand the complexities of human relationships and the importance of compassion, understanding, and communication in preventing tragedies like the one that befell the Mason family.